All right, so to get us started, we're going to be talking a little bit about nutrition and obesity. So this chapter, I think it's both interesting and it's also sometimes hard to talk about. I think everybody can sort of relate to it in one way or the other, maybe criticizing our food choices or thinking about weight is kind of a common thing, especially among women, especially among younger people. So just to get us started, I'm going to review the Let's Move campaign. So the Let's Move campaign was a nationwide program that was initiated by Michelle Obama. Maybe many of you remember this. And if you don't remember this, you might remember that if you're too young, you're probably remembering the food changing at your schools. So this was part of that campaign. And the reason why the book really focuses on this campaign is because it was one of the first times that there was a national campaign that was focused on reducing childhood obesity. And the second is that it really took a biopsychosocial model approach, which is, again, the basis of this class. So it emphasized a couple things, for example, nutrition as being very important, but also exercise. So it was kind of taking into account what people are doing, what people are eating, what access to food they had, and then whether it was affordable or not. And they also focus on the idea of education. So not just changing the food sources, but explaining to kids why. And it also regulated the new school lunch standards. I know there's some mixed reviews on whether that was positive or negative. I went to school in Chicago in the 90s, and I don't remember the lunch being very good anyways, but apparently somehow it got worse after this, so people complain. So it got worse, but I think they also introduced a lot more healthier choices which were absent before. So currently our state of overweightness and obesity among Americans, it continues to still rise. There's some later, kind of sooner data that indicates that we might be a little bit on the, slowing the curve, definitely. But overall, it's still an issue. It's still what they call an obesity epidemic. Interestingly enough, I think about 5 years ago, Corpus Christi was actually one of the most obese cities for its size across the U.S., so I found that to be kind of interesting since we're kind of in the South and we're supposed to have, the weather to go outside. I mean, I understand that in the summer it gets really hot, but I'm not really sure why Corpus is, why it kind of gained that title of being the most obese city. I don't think we're there yet anymore, so obviously something happened, but it was true at least 5 years ago. In general, developed countries have better things, right? They have better healthcare, better jobs, just things that are productive and that make people as a whole better. But for some reason, in terms of food, developed countries have this counterproductive trend of people eating less healthy and eating a lot more fast food, eating a lot more food that's not necessarily necessary, and doing a lot more of this kind of mindless eating. So that is a phenomenon that is true across many developed countries, but it's definitely a lot more pronounced here in the US compared to, for example, European countries. So they have less of an obesity issue compared to us. Now, quickly, I also want to mention the term food security. So I want to mention this because it's definitely a term that's been, I think, talked about currently with the epidemic or the pandemic. Where it's been encouraged for us to shelter in place or it looks like we're moving in that direction. But that comes with the premise that people can actually go and buy food and have access to food and the ability to spend, whatever amount of money it costs to buy 2 weeks worth of food. So that's been kind of a true, I think, concern because that's not necessarily true for everyone. Maybe many of us are blessed in a way that we're pretty food secure, that we don't worry about having access or the money it needs to feed everyone in our family. But the truth of the matter is that more than 1 in 10 households do not have that. So they experience what we consider food insecurity at some point. All right, so I think it's pretty clear that weight is not the only determinant of health. It's pretty naive to think that it is, and it's also pretty naive to think that it's the best determinant of health. It's related to it, and maybe it's a big portion of it, but it's not the only one. And a lot of that, again, has to do with the fact that there's not necessarily an ideal weight for everyone, that's going to vary depending on your age, depending on your bone structure, and a lot of other things. So there are a couple of determinations of why we are the weight that we are. The easiest one to know is our metabolic rate. So basically, we all have different capabilities of our body metabolizing our food and getting into energy. So some people have very fast metabolisms and they don't necessarily gain weight very easily. The second theory that the book talks about is the set point hypothesis. So this is kind of a newer theory. This hypothesis basically said that we all kind of have our natural sort of zone where we should be, and our body kind of strives to be in that thermostat. So kind of like our body tends to be at a certain range in terms of our body heat, like our temperature. The same thing goes for our weight. So if our body falls under a certain weight, then we start to get hungry. There's more support for this hypothesis, and there's a lot of other research projects that kind of have supported this with mice and the roles of hormones, such as the leptin role. Be sure to read about this in the book. It's a hormone that promotes hunger. So the other biological basis that kind of explains our weight regulation and our eating is focused on two areas in the brain, and I do want you to know these for the test. So the first one is this lateral hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is related to memory, but also a lot of like the general life functions, like our hunger and such. So the lateral hypothalamus, though, is a section specifically that is focused on stimulating hunger. So it gets us going and feeling like we need to eat. And the second part, this ventromedial hypothalamus, that is the section that basically tells us that we're satisfied. So there's been plenty of studies that support this and have looked at how the stimulation of these two areas in the brain, at least in rats, they can't really do it on people, obviously, does change behavior. So for example, problems with this lateral hypothalamus will lead to self-starvation. Now the last thing for weight regulation is that I do want us to know the difference or the role of adipocytes. So these are basically, that's just kind of the clinical term for fat cells. So we all have them, we need them, it's just part of our body. And the thing is that the more weight that is gained, these fat cells actually increase in numbers. So they increase not only in volume, but they also increase in numbers. And once you develop these, they actually stick around your body forever. So this is why some people have liposuction. I'm not promoting liposuction, obviously, but literally it is the removal of the fat cells, because even if people go on diets or exercise, these fat cells are still in their system. They don't go away once you get them. But the more that you eat, and the more that you are sort of in this obese, overweight category, then your body actually develops more, and they're permanent. Once people, though, let's say somebody becomes overweight for some years and then decides to change some of their life to lose some weight, they will lose the weight and the cells will still be there, but they'll just be sort of like flatter or like smaller in volume, basically. So the last topic that I'm going to talk about is eating disorders. So anorexia, bulimia, probably two terms that you've heard about before. They're a little bit different in their characterization, but can lead to very similar issues. Anorexia probably being the worst of the two. So for anorexia, this is a disorder that involves a lot of self-starvation, and it is definitely coupled with body distortion. So what that means is that people who fit this criteria not only are not eating, but they're eating for the purpose of losing weight or having a certain body characteristics. Definitely much more common in females. That does not mean that males do not suffer from anorexia. Unfortunately, the number of eating disorder problems among males has increased slightly over the years, but anorexia is still definitely gendered in a female issue. So the repercussions of not eating are pretty bad. So not only does it mess around with your nutrients, but it really kind of short circuits just your whole body in general. So hormones are out of place. Thyroid becomes dysfunctional. People don't necessarily look healthy. Their skin kind of becomes yellowish, becomes rough. Joints swell. That is actually one of the ways that sometimes we can diagnose it. I know that there's probably this image that people that or women that have anorexia, especially young women, tend to be very thin and kind of fragile looking. But there's definitely a subsection of women out there who still classify as having anorexia and might, at least to the naked eye, look like they're in this healthy weight category. But in reality, their body is suffering severely from self-starvation. The swelling of the joints and the reduced muscle mass is something that again becomes kind of visible. Often you will see people who have eating disorders as sort of like moving their hands kind of in a weird way, and that's part of again the swelling in the joints, and the swelling of the hands also happens. So the demographics of eating disorders, so definitely again it tends to be a lot more women suffer from ED somehow, but it has increased in the past for men. So now we're at like 10 million, which before it used to not be this close. So it wasn't even half. There are some time periods that people are more at risk. Unfortunately, teenagers have high risk of eating disorders, college women, and then also athletes for some reason tend to have a higher risk. In terms of anorexia, it is definitely a lot more common among white women. The lowest among the groups that have anorexia nervosa would be Black women, followed by Hispanic women, and then white women. So just quickly, eating disorders in men, again, it's been on the increase. However, we really can't know how many are out there that fit this criteria because they really go underdiagnosed. And sometimes eating disorders kind of in men tend to stay with subclinical. So basically, they don't meet criteria to classify as an eating disorder. However, as I mentioned, in the past, eating disorders have definitely been very gendered. So it might be that our criteria itself is sort of maybe feminized in a way. So muscle dysmorphia is a disorder where there is a lot of dissatisfaction with the body, and along with a huge desire for just being more muscular. This became an official diagnosis in the last DSM, and definitely, again, it's common among weightlifters and males that are in specific sports. Now, where does the line lie from, being just wanting to maybe look better or to increase your muscle tone versus it becoming a disorder? The line lies where if this behavior starts to give you more problems in your life. So basically, if you kind of go back to identifying when a behavior is normal or when it's abnormal, remember it has to be deviant, it has to be dysfunctional, it has to be dangerous. So for some of these people, again, it might be okay to want to gain muscle, to want to maybe compete in that bodybuilding thing. But if it starts to interfere with their life in ways of maybe their relationships, maybe their finances, maybe they're becoming obsessive or they're worrying about it all the time, then that's when it becomes sort of a disorder, when there's kind of this rise of problems from the desire of a gaining muscle. So the treatment for eating disorders, again, this usually the best approach is multi-pronged. So many times people that want to really recover from eating disorders will have not only therapy, but they'll also have a nutritionist that explains to them why food is important and why nutrients need to be in your body. Therapy is very crucial for eating disorders because usually what you'll find is that people that have eating disorders have very malfunctioning thinking. So they tend to be very rigid in their way of thinking. They tend to have a lot of cognitive distortions, so in the way that they see themselves, in the way that they see food. So really the goal for working with ED clients is to change their motivation, to expand how they think, and to just have them think more flexibly. So not necessarily is bad, food is bad and thinness is good, but think really more holistically about health. Let me know if you have any questions. And I definitely recommend the documentary called Killing Us Softly. If you're interested in this kind of idea of thinness and eating disorders, it's a very, very good talk. Gene Kilborn, who's the host of it, gives a lot of really good examples about how media socializes us to become more pro thinness, and in a way that it's almost, again, unhealthy. So very good documentary, definitely recommend it. And let me know if you have any questions.